ABC News has obtained some of the 911 calls made right after Charlie Kirk's murder.
The Kirk speaker at UVU just got shot in the head.
What's the address?
UVU.
And what happened?
He's a speaker, famous guy, Speaker Kirk.
The first thing people remember is the stillness right before the sound. A blue September sky, a crowd of students pressed together in the Utah Valley University fountain courtyard. Charlie Kirk tossing red hats and taking questions. The hum of phones streaming live. And then, at 12:23 p.m. local time, a single crack, one shot from a rooftop, followed by a hard, stunned silence that fractured into screams and running feet. Security rushed the stage, carried Kirk toward an SUV, and within hours the country learned he had died from his wounds. What followed was a fast, jarring sequence that felt in real time like America watching itself in a mirror. A manhunt sped along by surveillance footage and social media tips, a surge of grief and fury online, and then a thicket of rumors and geopolitical opportunists trying to claim the narrative for themselves. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates.
Video footage showed Mr. Kirk, a close ally of Donald Trump, speaking and then slumping down in his seat.
The event itself was quintessential Kirk, an outdoor debate stop on Turning Point USA's American Comeback Tour, the kind of campus appearance where he courted confrontation and conversation in equal measure. ABC's Timeline of the Day, reconstructed with state and federal briefings, video, and student reporting, traces the shooter's movements. A young man arriving that morning in a gray Dodge Challenger, changing clothing on campus, moving through stairwells and up a building to a vantage point above the courtyard. He fired once, investigators say, then dropped from the building's far side and slipped into a neighboring street grid and a patch of woods. Within minutes, the university went into lockdown. Within hours, the first alerts and political reactions arrived, including a post from the president announcing that Kirk had not survived. The initial phase after any public assassination is often chaotic, and this one was no exception. For a slice of the afternoon, it seemed possible that a person of interest might be in custody. That turned out to be a false start as officials clarified that the suspect was still at large. Investigators released stills of a figure in dark clothing and a hat, announced a six-figure reward, and pleaded for help. According to state officials, the break came when the suspect's father saw the widely shared images and recognized his son. Before dawn 2 days after the shooting, the young man, escorted by his father and a family friend with law enforcement experience, turned himself in at a sheriff's office in Washington County. The sheriff later said they tried to make the surrender as gentle as possible. The suspect feared being shot by police and had agreed to come in on the condition that the handoff would be calm. By the time prosecutors filed formal charges, the public had a name: Tyler Robinson, 22. Prosecutors charged him with aggravated murder, a capital offense in Utah, and announced their intent to seek the death penalty. Additional counts included felony discharge of a firearm causing serious bodily injury, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and committing a violent offense in the presence of a child. In court filings and press briefings summarized by major outlets, officials described a string of details that sketched a picture, not of certainty, but of a working theory. That Robinson allegedly planned the attack for at least a week. That he allegedly texted his roommate about having enough of this hatred. That he allegedly left notes and messages pointing to his intent. And that he later appeared to confess in a small Discord group shortly before he surrendered. A judge will ultimately decide what is admissible and how much weight any of it carries. But these were the claims prosecutors put on the record as the case began. Some of the most striking forensic details emerged almost immediately. Investigators said they had recovered what they believed to be the murder weapon, a high-powered, older model Mauser .30 .06 bolt-action rifle, wrapped in a towel in the woods near where the gunman fled. They spoke about palm and forearm prints on the building, a footwear impression consistent with Converse soles, and even unusual inscriptions etched on bullet casings. Odd, taunting phrases whose meaning officials declined to interpret. In broadcast interviews and documents summarized in national reporting, authorities also indicated they were testing DNA found on items connected to the rifle. Each element, rifle, towel, screwdriver, prints, became one more breadcrumb toward a case that, while still very new, seemed to be building around both physical evidence and digital traces. The longer arc of that day tells two intertwined stories. One about the mechanics of a targeted killing on a college campus, and another about what such an act does to a country already primed for conflict. On the first point, the operational timeline was chilling in its simplicity. State officials say the suspect arrived hours early, moved through ordinary spaces any student or visitor could access, and found a line of sight to a stage where a nationally known political figure stood within a fixed time window. One shot, aimed from above and behind, was all it took. After the bullet struck, the shooter's escape route blended with normal movement patterns. Off the roof, across a lawn into traffic, and then into the trees, where he shed the weapon that would later be recovered by law enforcement. On the second point, the country's reaction, it was instantaneous and ferocious. Condolences, tributes, and denunciations of political violence poured in from across the spectrum, from Republican leaders and administration officials to Democrats and former office holders. The public mourning quickly merged with recriminations and claims about motive and blame, claims that often outpaced any confirmed fact. That is sadly a pattern Americans now recognize: the weaponization of the uncertainty gap between tragedy and official clarity. Within hours, the information war lit up. Fact-checkers and national security reporters documented a wave of false and misleading narratives that metastasized online. Fabrications about the suspect's politics and affiliations, baseless theories fingering foreign governments, and doctored images and AI-generated photos that clouded witness recollections and muddied news feeds. Researchers and state officials warned that foreign adversaries, notably Russia and to a lesser extent China and Iran, were amplifying and in some cases seeding disinformation designed to inflame Americans against each other. Utah's governor publicly urged the public to tune out the bots and bad actors. As one Associated Press analysis put it, the assassination became another test case for how quickly malign networks can exploit our most vulnerable moments. One rumor was so pervasive that it drew a rare scathing pushback from abroad. Conspiracy theories attempting to tie Israel to the killing prompted a public rebuke from the Israeli Prime Minister, who called them insane and outrageous. However one assesses the messenger, the moment captured something essential about the post-truth churn around high-profile violence. In the absence of patience, almost any story can find oxygen, even ones that collapse under minimal scrutiny. Independent reporting the same week leaned heavily on the findings of outside watchdogs, who quantified the surge of foreign state messaging around the story, tracking scripted narratives that were repeated across language networks and platforms. The personal stakes, meanwhile, remained painfully simple. Kirk was 31. He leaves behind his wife Erica and 2 young children, and he leaves behind an organization he founded as a teenager and built into a powerhouse of youth-oriented conservative politics. Turning Point USA's board moved quickly to announce that Erica would succeed him as CEO and chair, a decision they said reflected his wishes as expressed to multiple executives in the event of his death. In her first remarks, she promised to carry the mission forward and grow the organization's footprint. Even for those who spent years opposing Kirk's politics, the human loss at the center of all this, an abrupt absence in a family, was hard to miss. At Utah Valley University, classes resumed with a heavy quiet. Students returned to the courtyard where the stage had stood and found flags draped, flowers clustered against concrete, and the press vans finally gone. First-year students told reporters the campus didn't feel like their campus. Administrators and counselors talked openly about trauma, and police presence remained visible as the investigation moved from sprint to marathon. For many on campus, the point wasn't whether one agreed with Kirk. It was that a public square had turned deadly, and that would leave marks for a long time. The legal road ahead typically unfolds in familiar steps: arraignments, motions, evidentiary hearings, trial prep, and yet even the familiar will feel charged here. Prosecutors have signaled they will seek the ultimate punishment, which means the defense will fight on Capitol terrain from the start: venue, jury selection, mental state, admissibility of statements to family or in online chats, and the chain of custody for the physical evidence. It is also likely the court will face disputes about the intense media glare, about the spillover from national commentary, and about whether any juror can be truly untainted by the online crossfire that surrounded the case within minutes of the shooting. If there was a single image that captured the raw mechanics of the manhunt, it was the grainy clip of a figure in black climbing down from the roof in broad daylight. Moments later, the line of white and blue cruisers streaking toward campus, the crime scene tape slicing through a field of posters, the woods north of campus where the rifle was later recovered. Investigators talked about leaving palm impressions and shoe marks, small human signatures that the lab could translate into probability, and a towel that might, if the testing matched, carry enough DNA to tether a weapon to a person beyond reasonable doubt. As one CBS reconstruction noted, even the bullet casings bore markings that will almost certainly become trial exhibits, artifacts of intent the defense will parse for context and credibility. Though the political commentary has been loud, the motive question remains the most difficult part of the story to tell responsibly. Prosecutors quoted messages and paraphrased conversations in which Robinson allegedly said he thought there was too much evil and that Kirk spreads too much hate. They cited text exchanges with a roommate and posts in a Discord server, but those are allegations, and motive at trial is as much about what a jury believes, with proper foundation and cross-examination, as it is about what prosecutors initially present. The public would do well to hold both thoughts, that words reported in charging documents can be true and that they still must be tested. Outside the courtroom, the assassination sent ripples through media and entertainment. One of the biggest shockwaves came when ABC suspended Jimmy Kimmel Live after the host's commentary about the killing ignited political backlash and regulatory saber-rattling. Whether one reads the episode as corporate overcaution or state pressure, and many argued both, it underscored how quickly the space for speech narrows after violence and how the boundaries of acceptable discourse are policed in real time by a mix of ratings, advertisers, and elected officials. That reaction, cultural institutions recalibrating their risk, has become a hallmark of moments like this, for better or worse. For Turning Point USA, the task ahead is organizational and emotional. There will be memorials and donor calls, coalition work and campus logistics, and a host of practical decisions about how to continue a tour that was built around a singular voice. In announcing Erica Kirk's elevation, board members framed the moment as both continuity and charge, keeping the ship on course while attempting to expand its reach. That move almost certainly sets up new storylines. What changes at TPUSA without its founder's improvisational style, and what remains exactly the same because the institution was already larger than any one person? As for the university, the lesson no campus wants to learn keeps replaying. Open public forums are both a democratic good and a security challenge. The courtyard where students yelled questions about guns and taxes one week becomes a case study for future safety plans the next. Architecture matters. Stairwells, sightlines, roof access. So do time windows and crowd density and the temptation to keep security unobtrusive so that debate feels authentic. In that sense, what happened at UVU will inevitably influence how other institutions stage provocative speech in public spaces. And then there is the information battlefield, the place where so many Americans now live their political lives. In the days after the shooting, fact-checkers moved quickly, knocking down false claims about the suspect's registration and ideology, warning against AI-faked images, and tracing the paths by which conspiracies try to turn grief into grievance. Politico, citing NewsGuard, described how state-backed media in Russia, China, and Iran seized on the moment. Associated Press reporting traced the same currents and the way they sought to coax Americans toward violence. That is the larger story we keep relearning. Foreign adversaries don't have to invent our divisions. They only have to amplify what's already there. 1 week out, the narrative, with all its competing strands, settled into a few constants. A nationally known conservative figure was assassinated in broad daylight on a college campus, apparently targeted by a shooter who planned the act, fired once, and fled. The investigation produced a suspect now charged amid a mosaic of surveillance, forensic, and digital evidence. The political class reacted as it always does, with genuine sorrow and with rhetorical maneuvers calibrated to a base. The online ecosystem behaved as it always does too, with a blizzard of truth, half-truth, and rubbish, all moving at the same speed. There is a quieter constant too, the students and staff who saw it up close. Trauma doesn't trend, but it lingers. The adrenaline fades and leaves a residue, the route you won't take to class anymore, the reflex to scan rooftops in open courtyards, The sudden heaviness when a stranger climbs a stairwell two at a time. At UVU, a flag hangs where a stage once stood. Flowers pool where a crowd once cheered, and the campus tries to reclaim its ordinary rhythm. That slow, stubborn ordinary is part of the story because it is what violence tries to steal. What happened with the Charlie Kirk shooting then is not only an account of a day. It is a shorthand for how events are staged and secured, how evidence is found and tested, how courts absorb our worst moments and try to convert them into process and verdicts. It is a window into an information environment where truth is contested by design and into a politics that can't help but turn everything into a proxy fight. It is also, finally, a family's loss, a grieving organization's pivot, and a campus's long walk back to normal. In the short term, the calendar now belongs to the courts. Investigators and forensic analysts will keep working the rifle and the prints. Prosecutors will refine their narrative. Defense attorneys will build their own. Hearings will tick by, and reporters will keep chasing anything new, credible and otherwise. In the long term, the case will join a narrow, grim list, and it will be studied by campus police chiefs, event planners, and political campaigns who trade in large, open-air audiences. They will ask the hard questions that this shooting raises about the balance between visibility and vulnerability. No one article can hold the whole of a moment like this, and no single telling can do justice to its stake in public life. But if clarity is the goal, the basics are as solid as facts can be at this stage. The timeline of the shooting, the recovery of the rifle, the identification and surrender of a suspect, the charges and stated intent to seek the death penalty, and the credible warnings that foreign actors use the tragedy to goad Americans into deeper rage. Everything else, motive, meaning, consequence, will keep unfolding. For now, the crowd's memory of that one sudden crack in the sky is the part no one will forget. Picking up from the raw hours after the shot, what came next felt like a civic stress test, a blur of logistics, law, and grief management layered on top of a national argument about speech and safety. By sunrise the following morning, Utah Valley University had suspended classes and activities and then extended a full campus closure through the weekend, a pause administrators framed as both a security necessity and a humane reset for thousands of students and staff who had watched a public forum turn fatal. The university's message, plain and stricken, promised space to mourn and a careful return the following week. When the campus did reopen, it wasn't the same campus. You could see it in the extra police, in the memorials cresting with flowers, and in the architecture of daily life. Doors that had always been propped open now latched, stairwells monitored, rooftop access points rethought. Students described intrusive flashbacks, and a sense that their ordinary roots had been erased. University leaders emphasized counseling resources and a candlelit vigil for unity, the tone deliberately nonpartisan and focused on shared pain rather than policy. The scene, quiet procedural compassion set against the buzz of national media, became the image many Utahns took with them when they tried to make sense of an event that still felt unreal. The policy debate landed almost immediately. Utah's gun laws, especially campus carry rules that had been expanded in recent legislation, were thrust under a microscope. Critics said an outdoor stage with minimal screening created an obvious vulnerability. Supporters of broad carry rights countered that no policy could predict a high-angle rifle shot from hundreds of feet away. Local and national outlets parsed the details, what kind of screening was in place, whether bag checks or metal detectors could have made a difference, and how an event open to the general public should be secured in a state with permissive firearms laws. However one approaches that debate, the practical upshot was clear. Universities across Utah announced reviews of event placement, sightlines, and the baseline presence of magnetometers when political figures visit. Even the emergency alert system became a character in the story. Some students and faculty complained the messages that arrived on their phones were slow, inconsistent, or confusing, an outcome every campus drills to avoid. Safety publications chronicled the criticism in granular detail, from the phrasing of shelter-in-place guidance to whether a single authoritative channel should override the swirl of simultaneous emails, texts, app notifications, and social posts. The university acknowledged the concerns and promised a review, an implicit admission that during those critical first minutes, information can be as life-preserving as any locked door. The courthouse thread, meanwhile, tightened. The case moved from shock into process. an initial appearance, custody status, charging papers, and a notice of intent to seek the ultimate punishment. In Utah, aggravated murder is the state's sole capital offense. The statute is detailed and, by design, narrowing. Prosecutors previewed several aggravators they believe apply, including the public nature of the crime and the risk the shot posed to others nearby. Analysts and legal scholars reading the same statute noted that the setting, a crowded campus courtyard with children present, gave the state a plausible path to death eligibility should a jury convict. The legal timetable called for a preliminary hearing to establish probable cause, then a formal arraignment and the long pretrial climb that capital cases demand. If this felt like a local case with national stakes, that's because it was. National media covered each wobble of the investigation and each hearing date, but the most consequential reporting turned to the information war blooming around it. Fact-checkers corrected viral claims about the suspect's registration and politics. Disinformation researchers documented how state-aligned outlets in Russia, China, and Iran laundered narratives into American feeds, some blaming foreign governments, others twisting stray facts into ideological cudgels. The point wasn't to persuade everyone of a single falsehood. It was to saturate the attention field so completely that confidence in anything, police statements, court filings, eyewitness accounts, thinned into doubt. Utah's governor urged residents to resist the churn. National outlets showed just how choreographed some of the amplifying networks were. Away from the algorithms, human rhythms reasserted themselves. Memorials multiplied. A planned campus appearance several states away transformed into a vigil. Friends and critics alike stood under the same sky and said aloud that political killing cannot be normalized. The focus consistently returned to a family stunned and an organization suddenly leaderless. That latter vacuum closed quickly. Turning Point USA's board elevated Erica Kirk to the helm, invoking Charlie's previously stated wishes. Her remarks were brief and resolved, an attempt to keep the institution's center of gravity intact, even as its founder was being eulogized 1,000 different ways. For supporters, the succession looked like continuity. For analysts, it invited a question. What does a movement optimized around a single figure become when that figure is gone? Back in Utah County, prosecutors and defense counsel began to sketch the contours of a battle that will likely hinge on 3 categories of proof: physical, digital, and contextual. Physical means the lab reports and chain of custody maps that knit objects to a person beyond reasonable doubt. Digital means messages and posts, their timestamps and trajectories. In modern homicide litigation, a stray line in a group chat can take on the evidentiary weight of a footprint. Contextual is messier. What the defendant meant, what witnesses thought they saw, whether statements after the fact were bravado, regret, or attempts to mislead. In early coverage, reporters pointed to alleged texts and online commentary that prosecutors say gesture at planning and motive. Defense counsel will almost surely probe authenticity, provenance, and the familiar minefield of meaning. The courtroom will be where those fragments either cohere or fall apart. The law itself deserves a plain English moment. Utah's aggravated murder statute, updated this spring, enumerates circumstances that can elevate a killing to capital territory. A death sentence is never automatic. The state must first win a conviction and then persuade a jury in a separate penalty phase that aggravating factors outweigh mitigation. Legal analysts flagged several potential aggravators in this case, including great risk to others, that may be argued at sentencing if it gets that far. Some commentators reminded readers that Utah's capital machinery, while lawful, moves slowly and is bounded by constitutional narrowing rules developed after the Supreme Court's 1970s death penalty cases. None of that is abstract to the people involved. It means years of hearings, expert reports, and appellate checkpoints that can define a family's life. Security professionals watching the case extracted lessons with a kind of grim precision. They talked about tiered perimeters for open-air events, the logic of offsetting a stage to reduce clear lines of fire, how to treat roof lines as part of the venue rather than a distant architectural feature. They talked about posture, visible deterrence without turning a campus forum into a fortress, and about building redundancy into communications so that when something breaks, redundancy breaks the fall. Perhaps most sobering, they emphasized that an attacker willing to reconnoiter hours in advance and fire once from elevation compresses response time to nearly zero. Prevention moves from a nice-to-have to the only thing that matters. Local leaders said they would convene hearings on campus security and emergency readiness, not as a blame ritual, but as a way to nationalize hard-won lessons so other campuses aren't learning in real time. Amid the hard edges of policy and procedure, the cultural ripple kept spreading. Newsrooms debated tone, comedy shows recalibrated monologues, sponsors recalibrated risk. Meanwhile, fact-checking organizations released explainer after explainer to tamp down bad information that raced ahead of verified updates. What exactly had been said in the days before the shooting? Which quotes were genuine and which were invented? What investigators had actually confirmed versus what social posts were asserting as certainty. It's tedious work, and it rarely trends the way a fresh rumor does, but it's the scaffolding a shared reality needs while official facts are still being assembled. The case also sparked a quieter conversation among event organizers and campus groups who had long booked controversial speakers on a simple premise: that debate on a quad is a muscle worth exercising. Many aren't retreating from that view, but they are rewriting run-of-show documents. The revisions are prosaic, earlier site walks, camera placements tuned for threat detection, rather than just live stream quality, ways to segment crowds without making the audience feel penned in. They sound bureaucratic until the alternative comes to mind. The worst outcome of an assassination at a speech isn't that people argue more. It's that they stop gathering altogether. That would be a second theft and a deeper one. There were also threads of federal-state coordination that usually stay invisible until they are urgently needed. Briefings from the podium included both state officials and the FBI, and they read from the same page: shared intelligence feeds, a common language about tips, and once a suspect surrendered, clear lines about who would do what, when. Some legal commentators floated the possibility of parallel federal charges if prosecutors found a hook. But early reporting emphasized the case's essentially local character. A state-charged homicide with a national profile rather than a federal prosecution in search of venue. That distinction matters because it determines timelines, discovery rules, and even which lab does which test. If you zoom out, the way this tragedy lives in the public imagination will depend less on the docket than on the stories chosen to represent it. One story is institutional, a university tacking towards safer open forums. One is legal, a capital case that will force Utahns to say aloud what they believe justice looks like here, now. One is informational, a country learning once again how quickly a vacuum fills with things that feel true but aren't. Another is personal, a widow shouldering an organization and children who will one day search headlines to understand why strangers keep saying their father's name. None of those strands cancel the others. They make a braid, and it is not neat. Outside Utah, the practical fallout is already visible. Colleges in other states are running tabletop exercises built around an elevated shooter scenario at a speech. Police chiefs are benchmarking UVU's after-action choices against their own protocols. Student groups that have never agreed on much are acknowledging a shared stake in not letting violence define the perimeter of acceptable speech. And in the political class, never known for its subtlety, there is, at least for now, a consensus sentence you hear across the map: it cannot be this way. The test, as ever, is whether cannot remains a line or dissolves into a shrug when the news cycle moves on. Meanwhile, the court calendar advances one hearing at a time, and with it the hard work of filtering rumor from record. Reporters have sketched the next steps: probable cause hearing, arraignment, motions on venue and publicity, and the meticulous arrangements that attend any case where the state may ask for a person's life. It's tempting to look away until a verdict arrives, but justice, whatever the outcome, doesn't materialize at the end like a TV reveal. It accretes in filings and sworn testimony, in rulings about what a jury may hear, in a line of citations to statutes that have to be argued the old-fashioned way. What lingers beneath the headlines is the slow work of repair. Student leaders are setting up peer support circles that meet after dusk, because the hours between dinner and midnight are when nerves fray most. Counseling staff are offering drop-in workshops on breathwork and sleep hygiene, and professors in communication, criminal justice, and psychology are co-teaching pop-up seminars on trauma literacy, so classmates know how to check on one another without prying. Campus journalists, jolted by the experience of covering crisis in real time, have rebuilt their newsroom playbook, verification steps for user-submitted footage, a transparent corrections protocol, and an ethics line about when to stop looping horrific clips just because the algorithm wants more. Behind the scenes, contract language for visiting speaker events is changing. Venue riders now spell out sightline sweeps, roof access audits, and minimum staffing for medical teams. Insurance carriers are rewriting endorsements to reflect elevated risk gatherings, and organizers are budgeting for it because the alternative is cancellations that hollow out public life. Archivists, meanwhile, are debating what to do with the flood of live streams and phone videos, preserving evidence without turning grief into stock content. And in an unexpected bloom of civic art, students have begun sketching a memorial garden designed as a place to talk softly, remember, and imagine a calmer future. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on Charlie Kirk's shooting story? Real incident or media spin? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.